Hello and welcome to The Nation. I'm Gerard Ratnam. Merdeka is a term in Bahasa Indonesia and Bahasa Melayu which means independent or free. It is apparently derived from the Sanskrit Mahardika, which means rich, prosperous and powerful. But we're not going to be talking about that. We kick off our Nation's Merdeka series with EDDIN KHOO, a man who needs no introduction. EDDIN, it's a pleasure and an honor having you here in the series. Seriously, I'm shaking just having to interview you. Well, I guess the first place to start is, your dad used to be sitting here all the time, every year for us, and walking us through, teaching us bit by bit on how to understand Merdeka. Yeah. Now, your father, for those of us who don't know, the late Professor Emeritus Samsuri, Dr. Khoo Kay Kim, was a historian and has always emphasized the importance of history, not to us only, but I'm sure to his children too. What were the things he said to you and your brothers and sisters about Merdeka?
Yeah, my father was a very unconventional man, and he seemed to the general public to be very formal and kind of heavy, but he was actually a man who was quite eccentric and quite humorous. And I suppose my early lessons were following him. When he used to go on these tours around the country to give sessions on the Rukun Negara, of which he was one of the formulators.
Right. And I'd like to add here, just for the benefit of the viewer, that Samsuri was also the recipient of the Merdeka Award in 2018.
That's right, yes. Yeah. And yeah, he would just kind of open up the country for me and regale me with stories. In fact, I was thinking today, on Saturday, I have to go for a book launch about the late and great Malay journalist Abdul Samad Ismail. And I remember that we once encountered him in the middle of a traffic light, and this BMW with tinted glasses pulled up and the screen came down, and this man, kind of looked at the car. My father looked at him, and they were old friends, and they made a joke, and they drove off, and I asked, who is that by? And he said, oh, that's, Samad Ismail, and then gave me a whole history lesson. So his history lessons used to come in kind of very interesting packages. And that was the way. He was a great storyteller. I think that's how he also enraptured the nation with his stories and his explanations.
Now, your dad is Chinese, your mother is Indian, and correct me if I'm wrong, you also have an Ibu, she's Malay, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and she looked after, she lived with you all, she looked after you.
That's right.
Yeah, so I'd like to go back to what Tunku Abdul Rahman said. He once likened Malaysia's uniqueness to being a small, united nation, and this is our strength of unity in diversity. We see around the world the rise of populism. There's also nationalism and right-wing extremism. We see a lot of that happening. Malaysia has problems too. Let's not say we don't have problems. We have our problems too. But many would say we're still a model nation when it comes to racial and religious tolerance. Having said that, we also have harmony, and a lot of us, have grown up making a bid for ourselves. Would you agree with the statement that we are what we are? Given the problems we have, we're still doing okay?
Yeah, I think we are doing okay, especially on the ground. We have our difficulties. I think one of the things that needs to be done is that there has been a lot of conditioning over the years that have made, for example, racial categories, a lot tighter and a lot more of an edifice than they actually are. But there's also been various historical phenomenon that has chipped away at that. And very recently, we have, of course, a lot of people are quite cynical about this concept of keluarga Malaysia. But I like it very much because, for one, I don't think it's as grandiose as many of the other national visions have been. And it really goes back to the heart of what Malaysia is, apart from a nation with recognized boundaries, passports and identity cards. It does invoke the sense of community, I think, which is the strongest bond Malaysia has. So, the important thing now is for everyone, especially the administration, to understand what the spirit of that concept is, and then really work hard to kind of make that operational within Malaysian society.
Now, this year's Hari Kebangsaan theme is Keluarga Malaysia Teguh Bersama. The first theme recorded was in 1970, the year I was born. Was Muhibah and Perpaduan, or diverse and united. These themes often echoed a sentiment of the moment. what are your thoughts on the importance of this year's message? I know you've already talked about it, but especially in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, EDDIN.
Yeah, I mean, the COVID-19 pandemic, for all our kind of state of panic sometimes about what racial relations are and how we are coming together as a nation, a diverse nation, I think really proved that there was deep solidarity and deep empathy and understanding. I think Kita Jaga Kita was one of the great achievements of the Malaysian nation, when irrespective of race, real effort was made out there to go out and basically to attend in a very, very empathetic way to people who needed help and support. And I think this was done without any idea, any kind of sense of a distance between you and me. It was a really, really serious effort and so incredibly well organized. I think that's something else we need to remember, the capacity for Malaysians to come together, not just with any kind of sentimental attachment, but really to organize and get things done.
Now, speaking of organizing and getting things done, as someone who does a lot of commentary, who takes a serious look at our history every year, we depend on people like you to come up with articles or come up with a thought for all of us to read and reflect upon. What have been your efforts this year? And I mean, very simply, how do you celebrate Hari Kebangsaan? We all talk about celebrating, and how do you, as EDDIN KHOO, as the late Tan Sri KHOO Kek Kim's son, celebrate?
I don't actually celebrate Merdeka. I think I commemorate it. A great deal more. And now, of course, we have between Merdeka and then Malaysia Day, there are people who say, oh, we should just fold it all into one. I don't think so. I think both Merdeka and Malaysia Day have separate historical contexts, and I think it's very important to have a good reading of the country. And what does Malaysia Day mean, succeeding or following from Merdeka? It means that the country has been open, you see, open to acceptance of other communities, and we actually made our society a lot more complex by having Sabah and Sarawak join us, and Singapore at that time. So I think these are the things we need to remember and have our hand on the pulse of.
Right.
How essentially we are a country born of openness. Even Merdeka, there are two different Merdekas. The first Merdeka essentially is the transmission of authority. We didn't actually win independence. We basically saw the transference of sovereignty from our rulers and the British administration to the people. So we became a democratic country. What we're actually commemorating is our birth as a democratic nation. That's one. Malaysia Day, of course, we see the expansion of the country. So it's a question of sovereignty. So when it comes to Merdeka, I think really a lot about what it means to be a citizen. Right?
Now, I heard you answer a question in an interview in 2010 with another media house, and the journalist asked you a spot-on question. You loved the question very much, and he talked about we gained independence, not the hard way. A lot of countries, gained their independence through war and through strife and so on and so forth, which made them realize or appreciate what they have. It was not like that for us. Does this simply mean that we don't appreciate what we have?
No, sometimes I think we tend to be quite glib about what Merdeka is. Of course, the pageantry of nations, our perarakans and all this kind of thing, tend to distract the imagination of the public into those things, that we're celebrating a flag or songs and marches and so on. But we were not a revolutionary country, and sometimes thank God for that, because revolutions have their problems, India was, and look at what happened with partition. Indonesia was, and almost from the onset there were separatist movements and things like that. Ours has been relatively peaceful, prosperous as well, successful. But we have to understand that one of the major events that happened with independence was the idea of citizenship, because a great part of our community, essentially, namely the Chinese and Indians, essentially their status within the nation had to be resolved. Yeah, and so when we achieved independence, it meant the granting of citizenship to people who were regarded as non-indigenous at that time. And so citizenship had to be shaped and crafted from the beginning of that time, right? Unlike India, all Indians became citizens of India or Pakistan. Indonesia was the same. We had to work out that kind of cultural difference. I think it was a very evolved and very sophisticated approach that we had, one that the rest of the world today is actually grappling with. If you look at the way European countries, for example, deal with the question of immigrants and so on, we had actually established steps by which these things can be resolved in a very highly civilized and sophisticated way.
I mean, it's interesting that you talk about it because just last week the Court of Appeal had reversed the High Court decision. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll talk about this. I've been thinking about if I should ask this question or not. You know, we're celebrating, we're commemorating, so on and so forth. But I think I need to ask you this question. We'll come back just after a break and check in with EDDIN KHOO on the High Court's decision very recently. All this in our first episode of our Hari Kebangsaan series right here on The Nation, Bernama TV.
Rukun negara bertujuan membentuk perpaduan yang kukuh. Satu daripada bahagian rukun negara menggariskan objektif masyarakat Malaysia yang mahu dibentuk. Mencapai perpaduan yang lebih erat dalam kalangan seluruh masyarakat. Memelihara satu cara hidup demokratik. Mencipta satu masyarakat yang adil di mana kemakmuran negara dapat dinikmati bersama secara adil dan saksama. Membentuk satu sikap yang liberal terhadap tradisi kebudayaan yang kaya dan berbagai-bagai corak. Dan membina sebuah masyarakat progresif yang akan menggunakan sains dan teknologi moden.
Thank you for staying with us right here on The Nation, Bernama TV. We are currently talking to EDDIN KHOO with regards to Hari Kebangsaan. Our celebration begins with him. Of course, we'll be having Dato' Jimmy Chu after you, and Terence Das is going to be here. Tengku Christina is going to be here too. So you're all part of this lovely series we have here at Bernama TV. Now, having said that, you know, I was walking on eggshells thinking, you know, if I should ask you the question, what's going to happen? But I'm going to ask you the question anyway. Just last week, the Court of Appeal reversed the High Court decision, which would have recognized the citizenship rights of children born abroad to Malaysian mothers married to foreign spouses. Now, the existing laws have been in place since independence. What are your thoughts on this and other similar, some say beneath the surface, beyond the slogan issues?
Yeah, no, I think, you know, these laws were established during the time of independence. When people were very cautious about who they gave citizenship to, yeah, and if you go back to the proceedings of that time, there were very deep discussions about, you know, what the boundaries of those things are, and the rights to citizenship was endowed to the father. Yeah, it's now well over 63 years. I think it's time for the law to be reviewed. Yeah, and very recently, I think one of the judges was 2-1 decision. One of the judges came out, I think, with a very good statement. But our judiciary, we need to understand, has never been proactive. Yeah, unlike other countries, the United States is a good example where people actually are advocacy judges. Over here, we have a very conservative and orthodox system, who goes by the letter of the law. I think it should be interrogated a lot more. But it's not the judiciary who should do this necessarily. It's the legislative, right? So I think it should fall back there, and there should be a very, very rigorous kind of interrogation about whether the laws can be broadened. I think they should. But it has to go back to legislative powers to really have a very keen discussion on this.
So we are a federation of 14 states and territories. Now the government, via the 12 Malaysia plan, speaks of the need to step up development at state level in order to bridge the nation's socio-economic gaps. You know, we're having a lot of problems with that. What do you see as the greater challenge or challenges to having holistic growth at state level, and how can we solve it? You know, now that we're in that month of Hari Kebangsaan, Bulan Merdeka, I think these are things we need to talk about also.
Very much so. I think social inequalities pose the greatest threat to Malaysia. We are a delicate society. We still remain a very delicate society given our ethnic divide. And one of the trends, of course, over the course of the years, while it has not dominated our experience of living together, has been when things get taut and tense, there is always the recourse to ethnic differences. Right now, I think social, the social inequality kind of levels the field in that almost all communities suffer from this. Some with very specific experiences on their own. But I think we need a very holistic and a very expansive understanding of where the economy will take us over the next decades. We are a country that has been quite rapacious since the time of Dr. Mahathir, looking at hard development, infrastructural development. The world has moved on a great deal. People are looking at more environmentally sound ways of development. I think it was David Attenborough who said, if we continue at this pace of development, we are either very stupid or we are going mad. And if you look at countries around the region, Indonesia and so on, I think there are ways of looking at a soft economy, complementing a hard economy. People are looking at the creative industries, looking at agriculture, things like that. And I think we are not focusing enough. And as such, we are kind of being left behind, not just in the rest of the world, but in ASEAN, about looking where our economy can take us.
Having said that, I'm going to digress a little and talk about language, because the last time you were here, you spoke about language, and Elaine did ask you Bahasa Malaysia, Bahasa Melayu, and you went with Bahasa Melayu. And someone watched that. A friend of mine said, why does he say Bahasa Melayu and not Bahasa Malaysia? I said, I'll ask him the next time I see him. Having said that, with regards to language, I hear a lot about everyone speaking in good English, in Queen's English, so on and so forth. But I think those conversations have to stop. I really think that while English is a very important language, it's taught me what I know. I also think that Bahasa Malaysia or Bahasa Melayu is an equally important language, or this is just my personal opinion. But I guess the question is, the thing this friend of mine asked, why did EDDIN say that? Because
etymologically, there is no Bahasa Malaysia, as there is no Bahasa Indonesia. Its roots essentially are the Malay language. And the Malay language is not just the property of the Malay peoples in this region. It is the lingua franca of the Southeast Asian region. So in that sense, you have to look at Malayness also as being a lot more diverse than the constitutional encapsulation that we have. So I prefer the use of the word Bahasa Melayu. Bahasa Malaysia is our national language, which has a different operational quality altogether. So that's the first thing. Secondly, touching on your English-Malay thing, look, we have to recognize that we are an incredibly cosmopolitan country. We have great advantages in this country that a lot of people don't have. Most Malaysians should actually be naturally trilingual. So I do not understand the preponderance of one language over another. I was a child of 1969. I was thrown into an education system where bilingualism was emphasized. I think it was very, very good for us and positive, very positive effects on us. I love the Malay language. And speak it very, very flawlessly, I might say, including certain dialects. I think we are, in order to also nurture our diversity, we talk a lot about it. Let's engage in it in a deeper sense. Let's speak each other's languages and let that run through our blood.
But I also every time you're in an interview, whether it's here or BFM or wherever else, I always hear you say we need to stop white worshipping. Why do you say that all the time?
Yeah, because we suffer from a colonial hangover. And we have a certain kind of privileged class that engages very deeply and carries on that colonial hangover. And these days, it is not associated with ethnicity; it is associated with class. And I do empathize with a lot of people who believe there is a kind of derisiveness towards the Malay language by many of people of this class. These days, they are educated in private schools, something I'm totally against. And so they have a certain kind of attitude towards the Malay language. We have to understand that Malay doesn't just operate in our society, and I really don't care very much also about the status of national language and so on. I'm just talking about achieving our human potential in engaging in multilingual discourses. And I think it's quite shameful that people exist in a monolingual context. Particularly, especially if that language is English, which they believe to be a privileged language here and everywhere else.
Now, we often say that the greatest expression of citizenry is that of democratic participation. We talk about that a lot, but we've seen low voter turnout amongst the youth, even after Undi 18. What are your thoughts on patriotism among youth today? Say, having a strong intellectual tradition or whatever that
I'm
means.
not fond of the word patriotism. Patriotism can easily be subsumed by the state, and it can be shaped by the state. I'm very suspicious of the state, which is why I think Malaysia is a very nice landscape for me, because I believe in community, and we are a nation born of community. I much prefer the term tanah air, country, and cinta pada tanah air, love of country, which kind of immediately divorces the state from its citizens. I think a democratic nation is far beyond our ability to cast a vote every 5 years. It's about being able to participate in a quarrel. I think a nation needs to be in constant quarrel with itself.
We need to fight a bit more.
With each other. If we don't quarrel, then we will fight. That's the problem.
Okay.
So that kind of intellectual interrogation should really be emphasized a great deal more. Schools play a very important part in that. The mass media plays a very, very important part in that. But that is actually going on at the moment.
Right.
It goes on in lots of independent spaces, which is why I think the divide at the administrative level and what is actually going on the ground has become quite wide. So I think people who represent this, who claim to be our leaders, should pay a great deal more attention to the kind of diverse conversations that is happening on the ground.
Having said that, we've got about 1.5 minutes left, and before I let you go, I'm not going to talk. Your message to Malaysia, the rest of us, as we move into our 65th Hari Kebangsaan.
Yeah, I think as we mature and become 65 years old, it's about time, I think, to look at a lot of the things that actually make us a community. We have to appreciate our cultural diversity a great deal more. I think a lot of what we are as a people, we have to look beyond the nation. We have to look beyond the nation and look at ourselves as a people.
How would you explain Keluarga Malaysia Teguh Bersama?
I would explain it as essentially going back to the seeds of what our nation is. A nation is made up of communities and peoples, and as such is a family. We are small enough to be an intimate family. So I think it's to those principles that we need to go back. And while we appreciate our pageantry and our symbols, we need to transcend them.
And having said that, we'd like to thank EDDIN KHOO for joining us on the show. Don't forget that the hashtag this year is Teguh Bersama, Keluarga Malaysia Teguh Bersama. Please follow that and go to your socials and also promote that a little bit. It's about going back to communities, and it's about peoples, it's about us. So let's look back as we move forward. EDDIN, it was a pleasure and an honor. Thank you very much.
Great honor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for staying with us right here on The Nation. I'm Gerard Ratnam signing out. You have a pleasant day ahead and stay with us right here on Bernama TV for more updates. Bye-bye.